He's faster than a speeding bullet, strong enough to lift a giant kaiju monster, and able to leap tall buildings in a single bound. But have you ever actually stopped to ask how? Seriously, where's the thrust coming from? How does he blast lasers from his eyes without instantly cooking his own brain? And if he's soaking up that much solar energy, shouldn't he basically be walking around as a one-man hydrogen bomb? Because today, we're not just asking if Superman can do all these things, we're asking if the laws of physics would let him survive doing them at all. So before we even tear Superman's biology apart like Doomsday on a really bad day, and no, not that Doomsday, we'll get to that one in another video. We need to start with the basics. What are Superman's powers, and where do they even come from? Seems simple enough. Super strength, light, heat vision, invulnerability, super speed, freeze breath, enhanced senses, and X-ray vision. But here's where things start to get messy, because depending on which canon you follow, Superman's powers either make total sense or break every rule harder than Zod's neck in Man of Steel. In most mainstream versions, especially the classic comics and movies, Superman's powers come from Earth's yellow sun. Back on Krypton under a red sun Rao, he's just a regular dude, maybe a little taller. And we learned something similar in James Gunn's new Superman film that kicked off the new DCU. Clark absorbs solar radiation. That's what gives him his powers. Without it, he can't heal and gets weak. Basically, he's just an alien with nice hair and a strong jawline. But comic book multiverses love chaos, so now we've got Earth 2, where Kryptonians like Kara Zor-El can fly and use heat vision while still on Krypton. Earth 3 flips the script even harder. Their Superman equivalent gets powers from kryptonite, not sunlight. Then we got Earth 162, where Kryptonians are always superpowered. In Pocket Universe, Kryptonites are basically gods. Superman cranked up to 11, but with a nasty case of hyper-accelerated aging. And then there's the Bizarro variants. New 52 Bizarros have powers like freeze vision instead of heat vision, flame breath instead of ice breath, kinda like that Seinfeld episode where Elaine meets the Bizarro Jerry, George, and Kramer, who are the exact opposite of her friends. But even with all those wild offshoots, let's focus on the one version that actually matters right now, James Gunn's Superman, and by extension, the most consistent through line across Earth 1 and most mainstream film versions. Here's the key idea: Kryptonians don't have powers on Krypton. In James Gunn's universe, we see that Superman's cousin, Supergirl, can get drunk on a planet with a red sun, equals to no powers, and yeah, hangovers. Because on Krypton, under the Red Star, Kryptonians are basically just biologically advanced humans. They live longer and don't get sick, but no flying, no laser eyes, and no lifting giant buildings, and that is crucial, because it tells us that Superman isn't just super because of his DNA, it's because of our sun. Now that we've laid what Superman's powers are, it's time for the real question: how do they actually work? And no, the answer isn't just that he absorbs sunlight like he's some jacked up houseplant. Dig a little deeper across decades of comics and a lot of fans supported theories, and one of the most compelling explanations starts to emerge: space manipulation. Yeah, Superman doesn't just exist in space, he bends it to his will. In one comic, an alien weapon hits him with a shrinking ray. Thinking it like usual, Superman literally manipulates the space around his body to resist it. He doesn't just absorb it, he counters it by controlling the very geometry of space around him. This actually explains a lot, because in several comic book stories, we see Superman increase in size, not by growing muscles like the Hulk, but by stretching or compressing space itself, kind of like folding reality around his body to appear and function on a totally different scale. And here's where it gets really interesting: space flight. In outer space, there is no air, no wind resistance, no thrust, yet Superman is able to fly in space with no trouble whatsoever. That's because he doesn't need propulsion. Instead, he's likely interacting directly with the fabric of space, bending it, folding it, pushing against it. This is why he can achieve insane speeds in space, because he's not fighting against it. Now, within Earth's atmosphere, things change. On Earth, Superman uses the air itself, kind of like a bird. He's not just flying, he's sculpting the air around him to move exactly where he wants. So, kinda similar to how he moves in space, just with air instead. Then we got levitation, which is a whole different beast. He can stand perfectly still in mid-air, no movement, no wings, no jet propulsion, and that brings us to a very interesting theory. One actually proposed by none other than Lex Luthor himself. According to Lex, Krypton was a planet with extremely high gravity. To survive, Kryptonians would have needed to evolve with anti-gravity adaptations, possibly even specialized organs designed to regulate their personal gravitational field. And on Earth, where gravity is far weaker, those same organs give Superman the ability to negate gravity altogether, meaning he doesn't just fight gravity, he switches it off. This also explains why General Zod, Supergirl, and other other Kryptonians exhibit similar aerial abilities. It's not just Superman being special, it's Kryptonian biology. But wait, there's more. Because comics introduce another layer to Superman's biology, the Kryptonian biometrics aura. Think of it as a personal force field generated by Superman's cells. As he absorbs sunlight, this biometric stores and channels that solar energy, wrapping his body in a near-invisible layer of protective power, which is probably how he generates those lasers. So when Superman's flying at insane speeds, especially outside Earth's atmosphere, he's likely interacting with magnetic fields of nearby celestial bodies. You know that classic Superman flight pose? With his arms outstretched? When he positions his arms forward while flying, he could be adjusting his orientation through magnetic steering, rather than simply posing for dramatic effect. And this ties right back to his origin story. See, originally, Superman couldn't even fly. Back in the 1930s, he was just a guy from a high-gravity world who could leap tall buildings because Earth's gravity was weak by comparison. No flight, just long-distance jumps. But as the mythos evolved, so did the science. That gravity adaptation theory didn't go away. Now that we've laid out all the complicated sci-fi biology and comic book physics, let's simplify things. Birds fly because they flap wings and generate lift. Rockets fly because they burn fuel and generate thrust. But Superman floats, hovers, and flies at a super speed, often in space where there's no air to push against and no gravity to leap away from. Instead of flying by pushing against gravity, as the comics explain, Superman generates a field around himself that unwarps spacetime, and what that does is essentially reduce his mass to zero. And in physics, when something has no mass, it behaves like a photon. That means it can glide through spacetime without resistance. If this is correct, that would explain why he can hover perfectly still without a sound, how he can accelerate from 0 to Mach 10 without breaking his own bones, and why he can turn in mid-air instantly without any momentum dragging him off course. In other words, Superman isn't flying through space, he's gliding across the fabric of the universe, surfing the folds of space-time. It's time to address the massive Kryptonian elephant in the room. Most of his powers make absolutely zero sense. First, Superman's strength violates Newton's third law. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction, which sounds simple enough until Superman gets involved. This is a guy who casually lifts entire buildings, lifts giant monsters while flying, and punches people mid-air, all while staying completely stationary. And here's the problem. Physics demands a reaction. If Superman punches someone hard enough to launch them into space, he should also be flung backward with the exact same force, and yet he's totally unaffected. The only recent exception is James Gunn's new Superman film. There's a moment where Kaiju literally steps on him, and as Superman tries to lift him, we finally see a realistic consequence. He's pushed into the ground from the sheer force. But that's the exception, not the rule. Across comics and most film adaptations, Superman defies Newton's third law, and also does it in James Gunn's film multiple times as well, except that one time. Superman's heat vision is one of the most destructive abilities in comic book history. In some versions, these beams are hot enough to cut through buildings like butter or even boil entire oceans. To give you an idea, the average human body produces around 100 watts of energy when it's working at full capacity. That's barely enough to power a single light bulb. Superman, on the other hand, is firing energy in the terawatt range. For comparison, Homelander's lasers from The Boys have been calculated to reach about 367.1 kilowatts. That's strong enough to burn through steel, but compared to Superman's lasers, it's like comparing a campfire to the surface of the sun. But this brings up a major problem. Where is all that energy coming from? If Superman is absorbing solar energy to fuel his powers, his body would need to store and release energy equivalent to a small star. And we're not talking about a one-time burst. Biologically, this makes no sense. Even if his Kryptonian cells are supercharged, the energy density required to release those beams would vaporize any material container, including a Kryptonian body. Number 3. Superman doesn't fly like a bird or a jet, he just decides to fly. No wings, no jet engines, not even a visible reaction force. But here's the issue. Physics doesn't allow for just floating. Every object that flies does so by pushing against something. Birds push air down with their wings. Airplanes generate lift by pushing air backwards with their engines. Even a drone needs to push air to stay up. Without a source of thrust or a clear manipulation of external forces, Superman is essentially performing reactionless propulsion, something that violates Newton's third law, one of the most fundamental principles of motion. Number 4. Superman can take a direct blast of fire to the face, tank laser beams, or survive being crushed under a kaiju the size of a building. That's most impressive, sure, but it also raises some serious questions. If Superman's body is that that durable, how does it still function on a biological level? For instance, if no needle can pierce his skin, how do his cells exchange oxygen or nutrients? And then there's weight. If his molecular structure is as dense as it would need to be to survive that kind of punishment, simply standing on a normal floor should cause it to collapse under him. Yet Superman casually strolls around Metropolis without leaving potholes wherever he steps. It's like his body selectively obeys physics, fragile enough to touch people gently, but indestructible when punched by another Kryptonian. 5. Superman's speed is portrayed as anything from faster than sound to faster than light. That level of speed is catastrophic. For one, there's time dilation. Traveling at near light speeds would mean Superman experiences time slower compared to everyone else, essentially stepping into the realm of relativity, something never addressed in the comics, except the Flash of course, but we're talking Superman, so yeah, not gonna pass, buddy. If Superman were to grab Lois Lane while flying at Mach 10, she wouldn't be saved, she'd be obliterated by the sudden force. The only way he could avoid this would be by perfectly matching her speed and gradually declaring. So why does it work in the story? Because Superman isn't science fiction, he's science fantasy. He's not meant to be a physics experiment, he's a symbol. His powers aren't there to make sense under the laws of our universe, they're there to represent hope, limitless potential, and the ideal of a better being. Not in his ability to destroy, but in his ability to restrain himself. Characters like Avatar, Aang, Batman, and Superman all share this trait. They prove that the choice not to kill, even when you have the power to do so, can be the greatest strength of all. But hey, if you want to fly even deeper in the truth behind superheroes, click on this video right here. Go on, don't wait for the Justice League to assemble, up and away.